The judge tapped her pen against the legal pad, and my sister smiled like the verdict had already been scripted. I didn't used to think about words like fiduciary or conservatorship. I thought about grocery lists, laundry day, and which coffee shop had a quiet corner where I could read. I worked as a clinical documentation specialist at a hospital in Boston. Unromantic, precise, the kind of job that made my friends' eyes glaze over. But it taught me to listen, to read the fine print, to pay attention to what other people waved away as paperwork. It trained me to hear what was really being said when no one wanted to say it. My name is Elowyn Hart, and one Wednesday in late March, my father fell. It was 10:30 in the morning when the call came. Dad's neighbor, Mr. Feldman, had found him on the kitchen floor next to the kettle, the burner ticking under a dry pan, the smoke alarm chirping in a stubborn metallic voice. I grabbed my bag and ran for the tea, texting my sister as I flew down the stairs. Sloan answered with a single ellipsis, and then, "I'm already on my way." Sloan always typed like that, cryptic dots, as if anticipating the next move before anyone else had even chosen a piece. She lived 20 minutes from our parents in Lexington. I lived 45, closer to the hospital where I worked. Mom was at physical therapy for her shoulder that day. Dad, usually careful, must have missed his footing between the counter and the refrigerator, the way he'd missed details lately. Dates, names, the keys in his pocket. By the time I reached the house, the EMTs were loading Dad onto the gurney. He tried to sit up when he saw me, panic going brittle in his eyes. "Elle," he said, forgetting the rest of my name but clutching at my sleeve. "Elle." "I'm right here," I told him. "You're okay." Sloan arrived in a flurry of perfume and efficiency, her blazer immaculate, her hair pinned back like a declaration. She hugged Dad's hand with her fingertips and then turned to the EMTs with the ease of someone used to being obeyed. "He's got a history of atrial fibrillation," she said. "He's on apixaban and he fell. You're taking him to Mass General. I'll meet you there." I watched her, a familiar mix of admiration and unease winding through me. She is brilliant, my sister. She went to a private business school in London, came back with a job at a venture firm, and wore competence like armor. People adored her for it, their starched voices turning soft when they said her name. I adored parts of her too, but her competence had a way of spilling over, filling every empty space in the room until there was no oxygen left for anyone else. Dad's hand trembled in mine as they fastened the straps. The EMT nearest me met my eyes and nodded once, professional and kind. Then the door shut, and the wail of the siren braided itself into the ordinary sounds of our street. The wind in the elms, a dog barking 2 houses down, someone raking last year's leaves. We followed in Sloane's car. She drove with one hand and called people with the other. Mom, Dr. Hendricks, the neighbor who had the spare key to our parents' back door. She had a list already forming, tasks flaring like points on a map. I scrolled through Dad's medical portal on my phone, ears ringing with the suddenness of it all. At the ER, I slipped into the current that was my second language. Vitals, triage, the whoosh of curtains, the particular fluorescent hum that makes the air feel thinner. Dad's CT was clean for a bleed, thank God, but the attending wanted to admit him. He'd been unsteady for weeks. The fall was a symptom, not an accident. He needed a med review, maybe a neurology consult. I understood, nodded, asked questions in that quiet, steady tone that earns you answers. Sloan stood beside me like a seal of authority, thumbs crossing the glass of her phone. When Mom arrived, her face went old, all at once. She kissed Dad's temple and whispered the soft syllables she has saved for him since we were children. The nurse asked, "Who was the primary decision maker?" And Sloan said, without looking up, "That would be me." The words struck like a miscounted step. "You?" I said stupidly before I could swallow it. Sloane finally looked at me. Her gaze held a shimmer of impatience that she tried to scrub away with a smile. Mom and Dad signed the durable power of attorney last year. It's the practical thing, Elle. Stop worrying. I'd known they were updating their wills, talking about advanced directives like sensible people, but I hadn't known they'd named Sloane as power of attorney. I swallowed the small, sharp sting of it and nodded to the nurse because this was not the time to turn the room into a courtroom. Mom squeezed my hand as if to say, "We love you, we love you. Don't let this rearrange the truth." But truth is a nervous animal. It runs when the door opens. Dad's admission spun the day into little squares on a timeline. Lab draw at 2, MRI at 4, neuroconsult at 6. I sat next to him in the dimness between appointments, memorizing the map of age on his Himes. Sloane took the calls that had to be taken. She stepped into the hall to talk to insurance and to a rehab facility about a short-term placement if they thought the home environment wasn't safe. She had answers I didn't know we needed yet, lines pulled tight through a system that likes to tangle. But they were moments when she spoke as if the answers were hers to own, not ours to share. "For the home visit, they can work around my schedule," she told the case manager. "I'll be the one to coordinate access." The case manager, who didn't know us, wrote Sloane's number on a form. I looked at the ink drying into authority and felt the wrongness ripple beneath my ribs. I wasn't jealous, exactly. I was awake. By evening, Dad was settled on a monitored floor, his heartbeat mapping itself in green lines. Mom went home with Sloane to gather some essentials. I stayed because that's what I do. I sit with patients and families in my day job when charts get confusing and the seniors are tired. I know where the blankets are. I know which vending machine still has graham crackers at midnight. Dad woke in loops, surfacing and sinking through the layers of the sedatives and the shock. He asked me if the kettle was on. I told him no, that Mr. Feldman had turned off the burner, that everything was fine. "Did I do something wrong?" he asked, voice tilted like a child's. I said, "You fell. That's all. You fell. We're going to make the house safer. We're going to make a plan." He studied my face with fogged curiosity. "Do I still have a license?" That's when I knew something was breaking in him. That is when the future lowered its heavy frame onto our shared table, and all the careful settings clinked against each other. I didn't sleep that night. At dawn, I walked the halls and breathed the disinfectant air like it could clear my fear. Sloane arrived at 8 with a metal water bottle and a sheaf of papers. She kissed Dad, kissed Mom, and handed me a copy of the power of attorney documents like a peace offering that tasted like tin. "I don't want this to be a thing," she said quietly in the corner by the window. "I live closer. My schedule's flexible. It makes sense." It might. It might also mean you have to remember we're a family and not a company you can streamline. She flinched, the smallest fault line rippling over the surface of her composure. "I've never forgotten that," she said. "Don't assign motives because you're hurt." I let the words pass. Dad slept through our awkwardness, his lashes stirring as the IV pump clicked. At 9, the neurologist came and murmured something about vascular changes and cognitive reserve and increased supervision at home. Sloane wrote everything down. I recorded the session on my phone with the doctor's consent because if I've learned anything, it's that feelings fragilize themselves into dust without fact to hold them. They cleared Dad for discharge 2 days later with an aggressive list of follow-ups and a recommendation for a short-term rehab stay. Sloane toured 2 facilities in Newton, chose the one with the newest gym equipment, and signed the papers. Dad didn't want to go. "He wants my chair," he said, stubborn in that way old men get when the world becomes a narrow hallway of losses. "I want my kettle. I want my own television." The plan is temporary, Sloane said, her voice a bright coin placed carefully on a scale. We need you to be safe. Physical therapy will help. Then you'll come home. I knelt in front of him and held his hands. They were warm and freckled and far away. It's 2 weeks, I said. Just 2 weeks. I'll bring your mug. I'll bring the pine blanket from the den. He went, because of the way we asked, because of the momentum of institutional machinery. That is difficult to stop once it begins. Because our mother's eyes could not withstand one more refusal that week. He went, and Sloane handled the intake, and Mom brought the blanket, and I unpacked his small bag into a drawer that smelled faintly like lemon cleaner and resignation. The first 3 days, Sloane was everywhere. She called nurses by their names on site. It was the receptionist's tone that tipped something in me. On Sunday afternoon, she said, "Oh, Miss Hart, we haven't received the deposit yet, but it's only been 2 business days. I'm sure it's on the way." "I thought insurance covers this," I said. "It does, but we require a small deposit for incidentals," she said. "Your sister gave us her initial card, but it declined yesterday. I'm sure it's nothing." Sloane floated toward us down the hallway with Dad's PT schedule in her hand. I told her about the deposit. She smiled without softness. "I switched cards," she said. "The company card was full. I'll fix it." "The company card?" I asked. She lifted a shoulder. "My business," she said. "It pulls points. Don't make that face, Al. I pay it off." I didn't say anything then. I tucked the comment into the part of my brain where questionable things go to wait. But the waiting didn't last long. Mom called me on Tuesday, tears strung through her words like beads. "Honey," she said, "Bank of New England froze our online access. I can't log in. It says the credentials have been changed." "Did you change them?" I asked. "No," she said. "I can't even see the savings. Sloane told me not to worry, that she's streamlined, but I'm worried." I was on a lunch break at the hospital. I left my salad half-eaten, walked to the quiet stairwell that smells like mop water and winter, and called Sloane. "It's safer if I manage access," she said. "Scammers target seniors. Mom clicks on ads shaped like buttons. I'm protecting them." "Give her view-only access," I said, trying to keep my voice level. "She's not a child. She's overwhelmed, and I need to move fast. There are utilities, house modifications, medical copays. I've got it handled." "What about transparency?" I asked. "It's their money." "I am the power of attorney," Sloane said, the sentence landing with the weight of a hammer. "Do you want this or not?" "I want them to be partners in their own lives, and I want to know what's happening. Send me a monthly summary, something." "You're not a signatory. I don't have to send you anything." She hung up before I could decide whether I was angrier at her control or at my own surprise. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with a blank legal pad and a cup of tea I forgot to drink. I wrote out every account I knew about from childhood: checking, savings, the modest investment Dad called the nest, the life insurance with Mom's name first. Then I wrote a list of questions that didn't know where to go yet. I would not accuse, I would not escalate, but I would not float through the next months like a sister-shaped ghost. The first answer came from the electric company. When I took Mom to the house to water the plants and fetch Dad's slippers, the lights flickered twice and then stuttered out. The outage app said our address was fine. The neighbor's porch lamp burned a steady orange in the twilight. The refrigerator hummed with a strangled melody that sounded like machines make when they have been asked to continue without consent. Mom was bravely cheerful, rummaging in the drawer for candles like this was an adventure instead of a failure. Well, I tried to. The site froze. We called the company together. After a maze of numbers and a hold song that sounded like the memory of a good day, a woman came on and told us the account had been placed on temporary suspend pending autopay failure. She switched the card, I murmured, thinking of the receptionist. "I'm going to leave you in the dark," she said carefully. "I need the authorized agent to call." Mom's hand shook when she hung up. She didn't cry. She has never cried easily. She cleaned the candle wax with her fingernail and said, "Let's go to your place." I didn't sleep much that week either.
On Friday, I took Dad to his physical therapy. He shuffled, resentful and determined. The therapist, a woman with kind eyes and arms like rope, coaxed him into doing more than he thought he could. I sat in the corner, cheering for each tiny victory like it was the Super Bowl. When we left, the receptionist handed me a statement stamped "Past due." "That can't be right," I said. "He's only been here a week." "It's the evaluation fee. Insurance will cover, but it bounced first. It'll clear. It happens." I stared at the paper and felt the line that separates sloppy from concerning draw itself in permanent ink. That night, I went to see an elder law attorney. Her office was 3 floors above a dry cleaner and smelled like the lemon oil they use on old desks. Her name was Rachel Wolfe, and she listened the way doctors listen when they've seen the thing you're afraid of before. "Power of attorney gives wide latitude," she said. "Most people don't abuse it, but it can be abused. The key words are fiduciary duty. Your sister must act in your parents' best interests. If she's closing access and bills are bouncing, we have a problem. The remedy, if persuasion fails, is guardianship or conservatorship. It's drastic. It transfers rights. It's a court-heavy process, but it exists for a reason. I don't want to take anything from them. I want to give something back, to put the brakes on something that's sliding. Proof matters, documentation, dates, discrepancies. If we petition, the judge will ask if less restrictive alternatives have been tried. Offer an accounting, ask for a co-agent agreement. If your sister refuses, that becomes our story. I left with a folder of educational pamphlets and a new kind of fear, a practical fear with steps attached. The next morning, I asked Sloan for an accounting. We were in Dad's rehab room. He was dozing with his hand in the pine blanket. I used the voice I use with exhausted residents when I need them to clarify a note. "I need to know where things stand," I said. "Not because I doubt you, but because I am part of this family and I need to be able to answer questions. Show me the accounts. Let's set up Mom with view-only access. Let's put auto pay back on the utilities. Let's pick a home safety contractor who isn't on a wait list until November." Sloan's jaw set. "You don't get to audit me," she said. "I'm already giving up billable hours I can't afford to give up. You know how my firm is. You know what I'm risking." "What you're risking is not the point," I said, heat draining color from my face. "What they're risking is their home, their dignity, their trust. Don't make this about your firm." Dad stirred and opened his eyes in that slow way that makes my heart ache. "Are my girls arguing?" he asked softly. "No," I said. "We're planning. We're making a list."
He smiled small and slipped away again. Sloan left without looking at me. Later, my phone buzzed with a text from her. It was a screenshot of a spreadsheet with line items blurred. "Here," she wrote, "overview. That's all you need." It wasn't. It was worse than nothing. It was a performance of transparency. I called Rachel on Monday. "We'll draft the petition," she said. "We'll ask for a limited conservatorship. You'll propose a budget, secured assets, ensure bills are paid. We'll leave medical decision-making to your mother with a healthcare proxy, unless there's evidence that's being mishandled." "Mom is tired, but she's not incompetent," I said. "She just wants this to stop feeling like quicksand." "Then we honor that," Rachel said. "We'll also file a motion for an accounting from your sister. The judge can compel one." I signed retainer papers, my hands steady because my heart wasn't. Rachel explained the Massachusetts process, the notices we'd have to send, the investigator who would visit Dad to assess his understanding. She warned me that families get uglier in court, not cleaner. "She will likely accuse you of trying to steal control," she said. "You will do the opposite. You will keep receipts." I went home and began to gather the story. I pulled the echoes into evidence: the past due notice, the electric company call, the rehab deposit confusion, the screenshot with blurred lines. I made a timeline with the careful ink of a person who has built a life on tidy columns and found comfort in order. I didn't tell Mom about the petition that night. I couldn't put that weight on her chest. I told her we were going to get more help and then did not name the shape of it. The investigator came on a Thursday. She was gentle with Dad and listened to him tell her about the mug I had brought from home. When she asked him who handled his money, he said Sloan held the folder, and when she asked him if he understood what that meant,
His eyes crossed that invisible line between knowing and remembering and did not come back quickly. "I made furniture," he told her. "I can still do the sanding." After she left, Dad asked me if there was a test he had failed. "No," I said. "You passed the only one that matters. You told her you like your mug." He smiled, puzzled and sweet. We served Sloan the papers the next day. A process server handed her the packet in the hallway at the rehab while she was juggling Dad's laundry bag and a voicemail from a partner demanding an update on something called a convertible note. "You're kidding," she said, flipping through the pages like she could turn them into a less threatening shape. "You really did this?" "I tried the other way," I said. "You made it impossible." "For you," she said. "Not for them." "For them," I said, "because when you turn off the rights, they sit in the dark." Her mouth tightened. She never needed volume to win an argument. She uses silence like a scalpel. "You've drawn a line," she said. "I'll meet you there." Mom cried that night. She cried the way you cry when someone else is breaking a wish you wanted to keep. I sat on her sofa and let her say everything that hurt without trying to arrange it into a more bearable pattern. "I wanted you to work together," she said. "I wanted you to be the kind of sisters who share recipes and talk about the dog at the end of the call. I don't understand this language. I don't like this world." "I don't like it either," I said, "but I like the alternative less." The hearing was set for mid-April. The days between collapsed into checklists and small mercies. Dad made a joke about the hospital pudding. Mom let me label the spice jars and found it soothing. Sloan kept things functional with a visible, brittle efficiency that made the air around her crackle. The night before the hearing, I stood in my tiny kitchen and ironed my only suit. I thought about the versions of me that had stood in this room in the past. Elowen, the student who bought secondhand plates and thought adulthood was a tidy list. Elowen, the woman who found contentment in rhythmic order. And now this Elowen who was not neat at all, but strong in a new way I didn't want to have earned. At the courthouse, we sat on opposite benches like two sides of a bridge broken by a flood. Rachel reviewed the exhibits one more time, her fingers steady as she traced the index tabs. My breath wanted to sprint. I made it walk. Sloan arrived in a navy suit and a necklace that I recognized from Mommy's jewelry box. It was not valuable, only familiar. She looked unbothered, which means she was very bothered. She kissed Mom's cheek. Mom accepted it like someone accepts a glass of water after walking through the desert, grateful even if it isn't what you asked for. The courtroom was smaller than television makes them. The judge's bench looked like a desk with aspirations. Honorable Teresa McKinnon read our petitions with the kind of attention that made me want to sit up straighter. When she called the case, my name sounded official and strange. Rachel spoke first. She did not vilify my sister. She spoke about systems and about checks and balances, about the risk inherent in unilateral control when combined with cognitive decline. She used words like narrowly tailored and least restrictive means. She slid the past due notice across the table with the delicacy of a bridge builder placing a plank. Then Sloane's attorney rose. I had expected she would speak for herself. She did not. The woman was sleek and sharp and wore her hair in a perfect twist. "This petition is unnecessary," she said. "Miss Sloane Hart has acted at all times in the best interest of her parents as their chosen agent. Any administrative glitches are exactly that, glitches. Using them to justify stripping our clients of their right to choose their own representation is an extraordinary overreach. We welcome oversight. My client has already engaged a third-party accountant to prepare an informal report. But a conservatorship is a sledgehammer. We propose a scalpel." Rachel listened, hands folded. The judge asked questions like a person taking measurements. She asked for the timeline of the electric bill. She asked when the bank credentials were changed. She asked why the deposit had bounced. "Points," Sloane said, and then flushed because she heard how it sounded. "Points?" Judge McKinnon repeated. "Credit card points," Sloane said, calmer. "I put the deposit on a business card for the points, then switched it. It's how I optimize expenses. I didn't consider the optics. I should have." "Optimizing is not a synonym for serving someone else's best interest," the judge said not unkindly. Sloane's eyes flashed, and I saw the child she had been for a second, the one who learned that being perfect is safer than being loved. I felt compassion clog my anger like a hand placed on a bleeding wound. I did not forgive. I held both things. "Miss Hart," the judge said, turning to me, "why do you want this, and why do you want it now?"
I used my hospital voice, the one that steadies infants and surgeons when the count is off. "Because my father fell," I said. "Because my mother is tired. Because the small errors are becoming a pattern, and patterns become stories, and my parents deserve a better story than sitting in the dark between an invoice and a point scheme. I want a limited conservatorship that creates walls around the money so it serves them first. I don't want to run their lives. I want to ensure the bills are paid, the house is safe, and they can see their own accounts. I want transparency and a budget. That's all." "Do you understand the gravity of this?" the judge asked. "It is not a trophy. It comes with reporting, the court's eye on your shoulder, and the burden of being the one everyone blames when something breaks." "Yes," I said. "I understand paperwork, and I understand blame. I also understand lights that don't turn on." Something softened in her expression. She looked at Mom. "Mrs. Hart, do you have a position?" Mom clasped her hands in her lap, like she does when she's thinking about recipes. "I love both my daughters," she said, and the room leaned forward, because truth arrives most often wrapped in that sentence. "I chose Sloane to be our power of attorney because she was here and because she is very good at talking to banks. I don't regret that. But I can't see my money right now, and that is frightening. I don't know where the bills are, and that is more frightening. I don't know what the right legal words are. I know I want to feel the way I felt before the lights went out." No one spoke for a long breath. The judge nodded, slow and thoughtful. She glanced at the investigator's report. She drummed her pen again, soft, like a heartbeat remembering itself. "I'm prepared to make a provisional ruling," she said, and everything in my body became an ear. The courtroom door creaked then. A bailiff stepped in and whispered something that made the judge glance to her clerk. The clerk stood, gathered papers, leaned close. "I apologize," the judge said, voice turning procedural. "Before I issue any orders, I need to review a late-filed document that's just been brought to my attention." Counsel, approach. Rachel rose. Sloane's attorney rose. They went to the bench. Someone handed up a sealed envelope. The judge read, and as she read, her brows knotted in a way that made my stomach go cold. She looked up at me, then at Sloane, then at Mom. The room stopped feeling like a room and started feeling like a held breath. "What is it?" I asked, voice small in a place that punishes smallness. The judge didn't answer yet. She passed the document to the clerk. The clerk made a copy. The copy came back, and Rachel's face drained of color as she scanned it. Then Sloane's attorney read, and for the first time since this began, I watched certainty slide off her face like water. "We'll take a 15-minute recess," the judge said. "But, Miss Hart, don't leave the building." I stood, knees shaking, as the courtroom emptied into a corridor that smelled like old wood and anxiety. Mom took my hand in both of hers and held on like she was holding onto a railing above a river. "What do you think it is?" she whispered. I didn't know, and the not knowing scraped at my bones. Rachel walked toward us with the paper in her hand and a look I had never seen on her face before. A look that said this story had just grown a new chapter while we were still writing the last paragraph of the old one. She handed me the copy. Across the top, in neat letters, was the name of a bank we didn't use. Below that, recent dates. And next to those dates, transfers. Large ones. From my parents' trust. To an account in my name. To an account in my name. I read the line 3 times, as if repetition could turn ink into sense. The numbers were not shy. They marched down the page in neat columns. Date, amount, from, to. 4 transfers in 10 days. 25,000, 30, 20. Then around 40 that felt like someone losing patience with their own pretense. The bank name bled into my vision. I didn't bank there. I had never banked there. But my name was a headline on every line, like I had written it onto a wall and dared the neighborhood to believe I owned the building. Rachel's voice was low. "I need you to breathe." I didn't open this, I said, because speaking the truth out loud is sometimes the only way to keep it standing when an accusation tries to push it over. I didn't authorize anything. Mom's grip on my hand became bone and heartbeat. Sloane stood a few yards away with her attorney, a private conversation hunched between them like a storm cloud, her face arranged into that unreadable calm that always meant she was playing multiple games at once. Where did this come from? Who filed it? The bank's counsel, late submission, just stamped received. Looks like it was triggered by our petition. They saw the names, saw the trust, flagged activity. They're protecting themselves. So they mailed it in just in time to blow up my case? I said, bitterness tasting like metal. They mailed it in just in time to make a judge want answers, Rachel said. That can help us if the answers are what we know them to be. And if the answers are not? I asked. Then we go to war with the facts we find, she said simply. The 15 minutes were not enough for a cry or a prayer or even a full sentence. When we filed back into the courtroom, my stomach felt like a fist. The judge sat with the late filed document clipped to the front of our stack, her pen poised, her mouth a careful line. Counsel, she said, I have before me transaction records from Berkshire Federal showing transfers from the Hart Family Revocable Trust to an account in the name of Miss Elowen Hart, the petitioner. I'm going to ask a question with the understanding that you may need to explore this outside of today's hearing. Ms. Hart, did you open this account, and did you receive these funds? No, Your Honor. I did not open an account at Berkshire Federal, and I did not receive those funds. I have no relationship with that bank. Sloane's attorney stood. Your Honor, this underscores the point of our opposition. There is confusion. There are funds moving. My client has an obligation to ensure their parents' assets are protected. We invite an audit. We invite oversight. But we reject the premise that Miss Elowen Hart is the appropriate party to be given court-authorized control when her name is on questionable transfers. Rachel rose. Your Honor, we share your concern. The petitioner denies any involvement. On the face of these pages, what we see is an apparent identity misuse. We ask for two things: an immediate freeze on outgoing transfers from the trust, and an order appointing a temporary special conservator, neutral, to marshal information from the bank and report back in 7 days. We further request that Berkshire Federal preserve all account opening materials, Internet Protocol logs, voice recordings of any phone authorizations, and branch video footage if any. Judge McKinnon watched me for a heartbeat longer than she needed to. Ms. Hart, if I grant this, you will not have control yet. Are you prepared to accept that? I'm prepared to accept whatever protects my parents, even if it humiliates me for a week. The judge's mouth tilted. Humiliation is not a legal standard, but good faith is. I am going to grant a temporary restraining order prohibiting any distributions or transfers from the Hart Family Revocable Trust, except for documented medical and housing expenses subject to court review. I will appoint a temporary special conservator to investigate Miss Maren O'Leary of Boston Fiduciary Services. Miss O'Leary will have authority to collect records, speak with bank representatives, and report back by close of business next Friday. We will reconvene the following Monday at 9 a.m. I expect full cooperation. If I find anyone has hidden the ball, I will act accordingly. The gavel did not fall. It never does in real life, but the sound of her pen scratching notes felt like a soft, decisive impact in the room. The clerk handed out the order forms, as if we were being given instructions in an airport, not a verdict in our family story. Outside, Sloane approached me with that flattened composure that used to live on her face during middle school report cards. You know exactly how bad this looks, I said. I know exactly how bad it is, which is different. Where would anyone get your information? She asked. It sounded like concern, but the sharpness threaded through it felt like a test. Everywhere, I said. Hospitals, HR files, adult life is a sieve. It isn't that porous, unless you've been careless. There it was, the angle. If it wasn't my theft, it was my fault. Mom stepped between us with the courage you find when the people you made are threatening to undo you, she said, quiet and devastating. We will wait for Ms. O'Leary's report. I nodded. Sloane looked away first. Maren O'Leary called me 2 hours later. Her voice was warm sandpaper,
friendly but made to smooth rough surfaces. "Ms. Hart," she said, "I'm the temporary conservator. I want to get ahead of this. Can you and your sister be on a call at 4? Your mother, if she feels up to it?" "Yes," I said, almost grateful for someone who sounded like they ran towards fires on purpose. At 4, we sat on a video call like unwilling contestants. Marin appeared in a square in the top left, short hair, no-nonsense sweater, a notebook in frame like a third hand. "Here's the plan. I've already faxed, yes, faxed, the hold order to Berkshire Federal. I've requested preservation of all data as counsel suggested. I will be issuing subpoenas in the morning. The court's order gives me that authority. In the meantime, I need a full list of all accounts, including those not titled to the trust. I want to see where funds could have originated and whether there's a pattern to the amounts." Sloan bristled. "That's a lot of disclosure for a temporary investigation." "That's the nature of triage," Marin said, unbothered. "You don't stop at the obvious wound when the patient is bleeding from 3 places." I pulled up my spreadsheet. "I have a list," I said. "I don't have online access to the trust, as my sister revoked credentials, but here are the accounts I know." Sloane's jaw moved like she was chewing a sentence too impolite to swallow in public. "I will send what is appropriate," she said. "Mm-hmm," Marin said. "You will send everything the order authorizes me to review. If you do not, I will note that in my report to Judge McKinnon. I prefer not to write that sentence." For the first time since the hospital, I watched Sloane's certainty falter for longer than a blink. After the call, I walked to my mother's kitchen and opened the drawer where she kept all the papers she didn't know what to do with, the coupons that might be useful someday, the warranty cards, the letters from companies with logos like family crests. I wasn't looking for anything specific. I was looking because my hands needed to move while my brain refused to sit. At the bottom of the stack, under a glossy flyer for a gutter cleaning service, there was an envelope with a bank's blue wave printed in the corner. Berkshire Federal. Addressed to me. Not forwarded to my apartment. To this house. My parents' house. The envelope had been slit open with the kind of carelessness that comes from hurry. Inside, a welcome to Berkshire Federal packet, a debit card carrier with the card removed, and a brochure about mobile banking with a QR code. I held it in the kitchen light as if the sun had moved into the room. "Mom," I said, breath shallow, "did you see this?" She peered at the envelope and looked lost in a way that made me want to break a plate just to hear something shatter that wasn't her certainty. "I don't remember that," she said. "It looks like something they send when you open an account, but why would they send it here?"
Because someone wanted to intercept it before it reached my mailbox. Because someone assumed that any bank thing with my name on it at my parents' address would be routed through the house manager, Sloan, and vanish into her quiet, efficient care. I took a photo, sent it to Rachel and to Marin. Marin called immediately. "Do not throw it out. Do not touch anything else in that drawer. I'm sending a courier to pick it up. Chain of custody matters." The phrase chain of custody turned our kitchen into a small precinct. I held the envelope like evidence from a TV show and tried not to whisper out loud to Dad's mug on the drying rack like it was a talisman. Sloan arrived 20 minutes later, breathless, not because of concern for our mother or because she ran from a fire, but because something had escaped the narrative she was writing. "What did you find?" she asked. "A welcome packet from a bank you've been very busy with," I said, not bothering to be kind. "Addressed to me. Opened." She recovered faster than I did. "Mail mixed in with Mom's things gets opened. That's not a conspiracy." "Everything is a conspiracy until it's not," I said. "Marin is sending a courier." "Of course she is. This is insane." "Maybe," I said. "Or maybe it's gravity." The courier arrived with a clipboard and a plastic evidence bag. I initialed where Marin told me to. When he left, the kitchen shrank to normal size, and all the air we hadn't breathed for 20 minutes came rushing back. Mom put on the kettle in a practiced, tender motion. "Tea," she said, "because tea is England and comfort, and the only paper we have never had to sign without reading first." At 9, Marin sent a message. A photograph of the debit card carrier that had been in the envelope. Magnified.
Card ending 1732, she wrote. We'll see where it was activated. I stared at the numbers until they lost their shape and became a story about a younger version of me who didn't think in numbers at all. The next day, Marin called from a car. Preliminary, she said. Bank says the account was opened online. Two-factor authentication sent to a number ending 0951. Is that yours? No. My number ends in 0837. It's been the same for years. They also have a copy of a driver's license, Marin said, careful. It is a Massachusetts license with your name and birth date. The photo is, unflattering, as these always are. It's not me. My license photo is 10 years out of date and unflattering in a completely different way. They will provide the uploaded file under subpoena, Marin said. I filed for it. The IP address used to open the account traces to a commercial office building downtown. They won't give me the tenant name without formal process, but we'll get it. I hung up and sat at my table and put my head in my hands. I did not cry. I felt the shape of crying move through me and keep going to stand somewhere else, somewhere less tired. At the rehab, Dad was stiff but brighter. Physical therapy had taken him to the parallel bars and coaxed him forward, step by step, over a strip of blue tape on the floor. He held my hand and told me he had dreamed about sanding the edge of a table smooth. Like this, he said, sweeping his palm through the air. As if the splinters are time, and if you keep at it long enough, the jagged places become a story you can touch. I hope so, I said, because sometimes metaphors happen to you whether you want them or not. On Friday, Marin filed her report. We received a copy by email at 5:59, the corporate hour that inflicts news like a paper cut. Her executive summary was written in the voice of someone who had to learn restraint before she learned how to type. A. The 4 transfers, totaling $115,000, originated from the Hart Family Revocable Trust at Beacon Bank. B. The destination account was titled Elowyn Hart, opened at Berkshire Federal on March 28th at 9:16 a.m. via online portal. Two-factor authentication went to ***-0951. Provided driver's license scan appears to show petitioner with Massachusetts ID. Subpoena pending. C. Card ending 1732 activated at 10:02 a.m. on the same day at a Berkshire Federal ATM branch at 14 Strummer Street, Boston. Camera footage requested. D. First 2 ATM withdrawals, $500 each, at 10:05 a.m. and 10:07 a.m. Card present. E. Subsequent debit transactions. Home improvement store, purchase of $1,987.42, electronics retailer, $1,290, and 2 online payments labeled consulting services, $3,000 and $4,500. ACH transfer to account ending 6644 at Merrimack Credit Union, $20,000. F. Beacon Bank confirms online credentials for the trust were changed on March 20th by a login tagged to an IP address geolocating to 200 Arlington Street, Boston. Subpoena pending. G. Temporary freeze in place. No further outgoing transfers observed as of filing. I scrolled through the report with a highlighter in my head. None of it was proof of me. All of it was proof of someone trying to be me. Sloan didn't reply to the report email for an hour. When she did, it was 1 line. And you still think I'm the problem again? I didn't respond. I sat on my bed and watched the streetlight outside paint the wall with a slow, pulsing halo, and thought about how identity is not a fixed thing. It is a set of agreements. Someone had signed my name onto a contract with a bank and asked the world to agree. On Sunday, I went to 14 Strummer Street. The branch was closed. A metal shutter, a sign with hours, a security camera bulging from the corner like a large eye. I stood across the street with a coffee cup and felt strange and exposed, as if I were casing a scene in a movie, as if a detective would slide out of a black sedan and ask me what I thought I was doing wearing my own face. "Here," a voice said. I turned. A man in his 60s, wearing a bank lanyard even on his day off, stood with a dog that looked like the word Milo. "You're staring at my office," he said mildly. I'm staring at a camera that has a story I need, I said. Do you work there? I do, but not today. You'll need a subpoena for anything you want. I'll have one tomorrow.
He studied my face. What did the camera see? He asked gently. I don't know yet, I said, but someone used my name to empty something important. He nodded like he had seen all the versions of this before, and none of them ended fast. Come back with the paper, he said. Ask for Tom. On Monday at 9, the courtroom filled again. Marin sat in the front row with her notebook and a look that said she would rather be a hammer than a feather if today required building. Judge McKinnon took the bench and lifted Marin's report like a page of sheet music she wanted to hear out loud. Ms. O'Leary, she said, summarize, please. Marin did, crisp and clean, like the report. Rachel added that subpoenas were in motion for the ID file and the camera footage. Sloane's attorney argued that a neutral conservator should remain in place instead of the petitioner seizing control amid a fraud investigation she is the subject of. I am the object of, I said, before remembering you don't correct lawyers in front of judges unless you want to be mistaken for one. The judge glanced at me and appeared not to mind. Words matter, she said, but so does timing. Ms. O'Leary, do you have any indication that the petitioner materially benefited from these transfers? No, Marin said. The $20,000 ACH to Merrimack Credit Union is the only link we can follow without further records. We'll need to see the receiving account owner. The retail purchases, if we can pull receipts, we may get a cardship ID or surveillance, but we don't have that today. And the IP address? The judge asked. Traces to 200 Arlington Street, Marin said. Commercial building with multiple tenants. We're waiting on the property manager. I felt the room tilt. 200 Arlington Street was familiar the way a smell is familiar before you find the memory it belongs to. Then the memory arrived like a door opening. Hart and Ives Capital. My sister's firm. Rachel's eyebrows climbed in a movement that contained its own sentence without needing words. Sloane didn't move at all, which was its own kind of movement. Is Hart and Ives Capital a tenant there? The judge asked, casually, as if she were asking about the weather. Sloane's attorney slowly folded her hands. Yes, multiple floors. Of course, the judge said, almost tender. Let's not leap to conclusions. There are dozens of tenants. We will wait for specifics. In the meantime, I have to decide who, if anyone, should steer the ship while Ms. O'Leary investigates further. Silence is a character in a courtroom. It takes up space, leans on the benches, makes people forget how to breathe. I looked at my hands and thought about the way Dad's fingers bent over a piece of wood to test the smoothness he could feel, and I could not. I am going to do something I don't do lightly, Judge McKinnon said. I am going to remove, for the moment, any unilateral authority from the current agent under power of attorney as to financial decisions. This is not a punishment. It is a precaution. Medical decisions remain with Mrs. Hart and her designated proxy. For finances, I am appointing a limited conservator. She paused, pen balanced in the air like a metronome waiting to start. You have recommended a structure, she continued, but I have an additional question. Ms. Hart, she looked at me. Are you prepared to work under close court supervision, to provide monthly accountings, to comply with any audit requests, and to refrain from initiating distributions beyond essential expenses without prior approval? Yes, I said. My voice felt like a rope I could hold. And Ms. Sloane, the judge said, turning to my sister with a gaze that felt like a hand placed gently but firmly on a child's shoulder,
Are you prepared to cooperate with your sister if I appoint her in this role, to provide all credentials and records within 24 hours of request, and to cease any independent management of funds? Schlon's attorneys spoke for her. We object to the appointment, but my client will comply with any lawful order of the court. Good, the judge said. I admire compliance almost as much as initiative. She shuffled the papers, and for a second, the room became a drum. She was about to say it. She was about to give me the word I had not known I needed to keep my parents' life from collapsing into a spreadsheet someone else could rearrange. A phone vibrated on the clerk's desk, not a ring, a pulse that made the pen cup tremble. The clerk glanced at the screen, paled, and stood to murmur into the judge's ear. Judge McKinnon's face changed the way weather changes in New England, subtly first, and then all at once. We are going to take a brief recess, she said, voice suddenly wrapped in something heavier. Counsel, please remain. Parties, please remain. The bailiff opened the side door. The judge disappeared. The clerk followed, holding the phone like it was a live wire. What now? I whispered. Rachel's eyes were on the door, calculating. I don't know, she said, but it's not a subpoena. We waited in that way waiting stretches time, makes it uneven and mean. Marin flipped back through her notes and underlined a sentence so hard the paper dented. Mom reached for my hand and missed, and then found it. And when our fingers finally linked, the small accomplishment felt like an oath. The judge returned 5 minutes later with the clerk and a printout that looked like a fax. She did not sit. She stood at the bench, both hands on the wood, and looked first at me and then at Sloan in a slow, careful sweep. While we were in session, she said, Berkshire Federal transmitted a copy of the driver's license used to open the account in the petitioner's name. She lifted the page. Even from a distance, I could see the shape of a face, the hard flash reflection of a camera in a DMV. It is a Massachusetts license. The name is Ms. Eloan Hart. The numbers match the petitioner's date of birth. But the photograph, though similar, is not identical to the petitioner in this courtroom. She let that sit, like a teacher allowing a class to catch up to the lesson. I am also informed, she continued, that the property manager of 200 Arlington Street has provided the tenant associated with the IP address used to change the trust credentials at Beacon Bank on March 20th. The tenant is Hart and Ives Capital. The room did not explode. It imploded. Sound went inward. Pressure moved space out of place. My sister's face did not change. That was the change. Her stillness was a confession I refused to translate without evidence because I still wanted to live in a world where we did not do this to each other. Counsel, the judge said, quiet as paper. Approach. The lawyers went. There were murmurs we could not hear and only half wanted to. Marin glanced back at me and at Mom, a flicker of human in a day that had tried to be made of forms. When they finished, the judge sat. The pen balanced in her hand again. The metronome clicked. In light of the information received and pending criminal review, which I will not opine on, I am prepared to issue an interim order as to the conservatorship. She opened her mouth to speak the words that would redraw our family map, and the door to the courtroom burst open. A rehab nurse stood there in scrubs, cheeks flushed, breathless, a security guard behind her. She scanned the room until she found me. Ms. Hart, it's your father. He's gone.
Gone. The word hit like a door slamming inside my chest. For a second, the courtroom tilted, the benches sliding away from me while my body stayed anchored to the floor by a thin thread of disbelief. Gone? I said, as if the nurse might realize she'd grabbed the wrong word and offer me a different one, a better one, something with edges I could actually hold. Her eyes were kind and apologetic and terribly sure. He passed in his sleep. It was quiet. We didn't want to tell you over the phone." I heard my mother before I felt her move. A sound left her that I had only ever heard once, when Sloane broke her arm in 3rd grade and the ER doctor said the word surgery. But this was a deeper fracture. It came from a room under the house we lived in, the basement beneath our bones. Rachel touched my elbow. The judge had already stepped down from the bench. The bailiff was saying something about a car waiting, about the rehab sending a social worker to meet us. People parted without being asked, as if grief were a magnet rearranging metal filings in the air. We didn't run. We moved with the heavy, purposeful walk of people who are suddenly carrying invisible furniture down a narrow staircase. I don't remember the elevator wide down or the way the air felt outside. I remember the roadside trees blurring through the window of Rachel's car and the way Mom's hands were empty, as if she had meant to bring something and forgotten it. The way you forget whether you turned off the stove after the smoke alarm goes off. In the room, Dad looked like sleep, not loss. The pine blanket was pulled up to his chest. His mouth had settled into a line that reminded me of the way he concentrated when he tied fishing lures, gentle, slightly amused at his own patience. The nurse had shaved him that morning. His jaw was smooth. He had left wearing care. Mom sat. She touched his forearm and then used both hands to cup his face, exactly the way she had cupped mine 1,000 times when fever made me strange to myself. "Love," she whispered, and then love again, like a password. Sloane stood at the foot of the bed with her arms wrapped around her own elbows, as if she were holding herself back from falling into the space where he wasn't. For one steady minute, we were only daughters and a wife. There were no petitions, no IP addresses, no envelopes we had to initial for chain of custody. There was just the largeness of the man who had built our bookcases and our holidays, and who had once driven at midnight to change my flat tire and stayed to sweep glass off the shoulder so no one else would cut themselves on our bad luck. I don't know how long we were in that moment. Grief clocks are not made of seconds, they're made of breaths. Eventually, the social worker cleared her throat softly. She asked if we had a funeral home in mind, if they were religious preferences she should note, if we wanted to donate anything, if we needed a quiet room. Her questions were a quilt made of kindness and policy. We wrapped ourselves in it because we had to. Naked sorrow is not something you can carry down a hallway. I called the funeral home Dad had once mentioned in a practical conversation after a neighbor's passing. They were decent folks, he had said, which coming from him meant everything. They could receive him that afternoon. They would treat him as if he could feel the light in their hands. That's what the director promised, and I believed him because I needed to believe something that day, and the phone gave me a voice that sounded like mine. I signed papers, Sloane signed papers. Mom held the pen and then put it down and then held it again. We drove home in a line, 3 cars, as if we were practicing for the slow parade of the days that would follow. At the house, the power was on. The bill had been paid the day before by Marin's emergency authorization once the freeze order had carved out the exception for essential utilities. The light felt less like light and more like an apology we could stand under. We made tea and didn't drink it. People began to appear. Mr. Feldman came with a pie that was more gesture than pastry. The neighbor kids chalked a heart on the sidewalk. My colleague from the hospital texted door codes for grief groups and a casserole recipe that always made people eat even when their stomachs said no. At 7, after the world had slowed to a dignified hum of condolences, I walked down the hall to Dad's small workshop off the garage. It smelled like cedar and old magazines. The last thing he'd been sanding lay on the bench. A picture frame. Corners mitered perfectly, no photograph waiting yet. I ran my finger along the edge and remembered the way he'd shown me to test with the soft skin beside the thumb, not the tips. In the quiet, my phone buzzed. "Marin." "I'm so sorry," she said immediately. "I didn't know how to reach you gently and quickly at the same time." "Thank you," I said. The words sounded like a borrowed sweater. "I also have updates," she said, "because the world doesn't stop building itself just because part of yours has fallen down. I know it's a terrible timing, but there is a hearing in the morning. We can ask the judge to postpone,
Or, if you want the safety net in place for your mother, we can proceed with the financial piece while leaving the rest for later. Proceed, I said, surprising myself with how steady the syllables were. He would hate the lights going out twice. Marin exhaled. Then here's what I have. The Merrimack Credit Union account ending 6644 belongs to a woman named Leela Gent. She's registered as an employee of Hart and Ives Capital, title Executive Operations. The phone number ending 0951, used for two-factor authentication, belongs to a prepaid device purchased at a convenience store 3 blocks from 200 Arlington Street. Security footage at Berkshire Federal shows a woman wearing a navy suit and a scarf. Her face is masked by a mask and sunglasses. She's about your height, Miss Hart. The chip on the debit card carrier matches the card that was mailed to your parents' address. The activation terminal captures height and build, but it's not definitive. The IP logs from Bank and Bank show the credential change came from a device registered to your sister's firm's network. We can't say who at the keyboard typed the keys. My hand tightened on the workbench. The wood under my palm was a fact. The rest was a map with roads drawn in pencil. Has Leela been contacted? I asked. Not by me, Marin said. That's not my lane. But I expect the bank will file a SAR, Suspicious Activity Report, and law enforcement may visit. My role is to keep the money from moving and to tell the judge what happened and what we don't know. Okay, I said. Tomorrow then. Tomorrow, she said softly. And again, I'm sorry. I hung up and stood there in the half-light of the garage with the smell of sawdust and the sound of my father's absence. I don't know how long I stayed. Long enough to feel the first outline of a promise I hadn't known I was making, to turn toward the hard thing, not away. We returned to court the next morning. Black dresses, navy suits, eyes that looked like they hadn't slept under any law that applied to ordinary people. Judge McKinnon wore the same careful face, but the kindness in it had grown a new root. She acknowledged Dad's passing first, not with a speech, but with a sentence that wrapped itself around us like a small, necessary shawl. Mr. Hart's death changes some legal posture, but it does not change the urgency of ensuring Mrs. Hart's stability. I extend my condolences. Rachel thanked her. I said nothing. There are moments when words make holes. Marin summarized the new findings. Leela Gent's name in the air felt like a piece of evidence that could be either a bridge or a trap. Sloane's attorney objected to its admission without context and to Marin's speculation about IP addresses. The judge allowed the summary for procedural purposes with the cool precision of someone who knows her role in the machine and plays it like an instrument. Then the judge made the decision that would become the spine of our household. Given the documented lapses, and given the conflict of interest introduced by the source of the credential change, I'm appointing Miss Aloan Hart as limited conservator for the financial affairs of Mrs. Hart and for the administration of the Hart Family Revocable Trust as it pertains to Mrs. Hart's maintenance and care. Ms. Hart will open a conservatorship account at a court-approved institution, marshal funds as necessary, reinstate essential services, and provide the court with monthly accountings. Ms. O'Leary will remain as monitor for 60 days and may seek extensions as needed. Any expenditure exceeding $2,500 requires prior court approval unless it concerns medical emergencies. Ms. Sloane Hart is ordered to surrender all relevant credentials and records within 24 hours.
It was done. Not with a flourish, with a list. Sloane looked at me across the aisle. Something old and tender and furious passed through her eyes. I wished, for a stupid second, that we were 8 and 10 again, and the fight was about who got the blue bowl for cereal. We went home to the rituals you can't survive without. I called the electric company and put accounts back on autopay with the new conservatorship routing. I opened the court-approved account and met a banker who spoke to me like a peer, not a nuisance. I wrote a budget with line items labeled Mom's Groceries and House Cleaner once a month and Physical Therapy copays. I set view-only roles for Mom on everything. When I texted her the login codes, she sent a heart, which is not how my mother usually texts, and I cried in my car, where no one could see my face fold. Rachel handled the death certificates and the immediate spillage of logistics no one warns you will pour through your door. We scheduled the funeral for Friday. I folded the good tablecloth into a bag and told myself I was not going to buy a casket with a name. Dad would have made a terrible joke about marketing. We chose the simple pine, which felt right. On Wednesday, Marin sent me a copy of an email she had received from Beacon Bank's compliance officer. It was one line and an attachment. Pursuant to subpoena, the line read, the attachment was a scan of the driver's license used to open the Berkshire Federal account in my name. I opened it and stared. The face could be mine if you were in a hurry, if you believed what you were told at the top of the page more than what you saw at the center. The jawline was slightly wrong. The eyes looked like mine, but not from the inside. The address listed was my parents' house, not my apartment. The photo timestamp metadata in the corner, a tiny string the DMV never expects anyone to read, didn't match the day I had renewed my actual license years ago. I sent it to Rachel. She replied in 4 words, "We have our story." Thursday morning, the doorbell rang while I was tying Mom's scarf. A woman stood on the porch in a navy blazer, brown hair in a low knot, badge at her belt. "Miss Hart," she said, looking between us with a kindness she had probably learned how to carry like a tool. "Detective Norris, may we speak?" We sat at the kitchen table where we had once done math homework. She asked me questions about my accounts, my phone, my whereabouts on March 28th at 9:16 a.m. I was with Dad at the hospital that morning. I pulled up the visitor record app and showed her the timestamp. I gave her permission to access my credit report and my phone logs. I told her everything I knew about Leela Gent, which was only a name and a job title. She turned to my mother gently. "Miss Hart, has anyone else had access to your mail recently?" "My daughters," Mom said, and then stopped as if the heir had asked her for a price, and she needed a moment to consider whether she could afford it. "And the house cleaner and Mr. Feldman once. He brought in the post when it was raining." Detective Norris nodded and wrote without looking like she was writing a list of suspects. It looked like she was writing a recipe. We gave her the opened Berkshire Federal envelope. She photographed it like a tourist takes pictures of landmarks. Careful, dutiful, not indifferent. She left with a card that had her cell written on the back. The funeral was a weather system. People who had loved Dad in their steady, quiet ways came to see him to the door of the next room and say the things you can only say when you agree to be fragile together. He taught me how to use a drill. He made me a bookcase that fit like it grew from the floor. He waved every time I drove by. He loved your mother the way all of us wanted to be loved when we were older. I stood and listened and felt my body become the coat rack for other people's memories of him, and figured that was fair. He had so much of ours. Sloane spoke. Her voice broke once. She said he had been the first person to take her ambition seriously, that he had built her a desk when she was 14, and declared she wanted to be the kind of adult who had meetings. The room laughed gently. She looked at me when she said, "He taught us both to sand the edges until your fingers find the smooth." I looked back and nodded, because the thing about truth is that it allows you to share it with someone you're angry at without it breaking. After, the house filled with casseroles and people and whispers and the kind of fatigue that has opinions, I found Sloane in Dad's workshop, staring at the frame. Her hand hovered over it like she wanted to touch it, but needed permission from someone we could no longer ask. "I can't do this with you like this," she said without turning. "Not with eyes on us. Not with a detective asking questions whose answers feel like traps no matter what you say." "Then tell the truth," I said. "It's a narrow road, that's why it works." She swallowed. "You think I did this," she said. "You think I took their money and put it in your name and called it points and optimization?" "I think the IP address came from your office," I said. "I think Leela works for you. I think an envelope addressed to me was opened here. And I think you've been so sure you are the only answer to every problem that you stopped seeing the problems your answer creates." She turned then. Her eyes were wet and furious.
I did not open an account in your name, she said, cutting each word until it bled. I did not take a penny. I have made mistakes. I have been arrogant, but I did not steal from them and I did not frame you. I believed her before I decided to, which is its own kind of decision. Then who? I asked. She looked at the frame again and put her hand flat on the bench, as if the wood was a lie detector. My firm is drowning. Capital calls, a failed fund. I did not tell you because every time I have told you something like this, you have turned it into a sermon of humility, and I don't have room for sermons when the water is already at my chin. So you pushed harder, I said. So I pushed harder, and while I was pushing, Leela was doing the kind of math that turned other people into answers. She told me what she should have told me months ago. Leela had been with the firm for 6 years. Loyal, efficient, invisible in the way that makes people powerful. She had access to calendars, to scanners, to the back office systems that most people are too bored to learn but that run the world more than whatever CEO is on the magazine cover that month. She came to me 3 weeks ago about a budget variance. I told her to fix it. I didn't ask enough questions. I told myself I would circle back. I didn't. And now there are lines on a report that look like my office because they are my office. I wanted to be angry that she was telling me this here, among the sawdust and the clamps, after the funeral, after the appointment, after. But the anger didn't feel useful anymore. It felt like a coat I could refuse to put on. What are you going to do? I asked. She closed her eyes and opened them. Tell the truth, she said, even if it ruins me. Monday morning, the detective returned. She had security footage from 200 Arlington Street lobby camera. A woman in a scarf entered at 8:51 a.m. She swiped a fob at the Hart and Ives bank of elevators. At 9:12 a.m., the same woman exited, walked to the corner where the convenience store glowed neon in the gray morning, and purchased a prepaid phone. The store clerk remembered her because she asked for a receipt with the IMEI printed on it, which no one ever asks for unless they know exactly why they need it. Do you recognize her? The detective asked. The scarf covered her jaw. The sunglasses were large, but her hands were bare. On the right wrist, a small scar shaped like a comma. Sloane leaned in, and something in her softened and then sharpened like glass under cloth. That's Leela, she said. 2 hours later, the detective called again from a hallway which sounded like police. Footsteps, phones, the squeak of a door closer. She's not at the office, the detective said. Her apartment is empty, but the Merrimack account has a new hold. We'll find her. I made soup I didn't eat. I paid a physical therapy bill that had sat on the hall table for a week because numbers had stopped meaning anything that wasn't evidence. I helped Mom write thank you notes with phrases we didn't believe in but needed to say. Your kindness means everything. We are grateful for your support. He would have loved the lilies. On Wednesday, Leela was found in a short-term rental in Providence, the kind you book when you need a life with less furniture. She didn't run far. People like Leela rarely do. They imagine their invisibility is a passport until the border is closer than they thought. Rachel called with the news before the detective could. She's in custody. Don't talk to the press if anyone calls. We let the process work. We went to court again. Not for Leela, that would happen in a different room with a different judge, for the next piece of our own jigsaw. Marin presented the formal accounting of what I had done in the past 10 days. Bills paid, autopays reinstated, the conservatorship account funded with a transfer from the trust as authorized by the court. It was a clean list. It made my hands stop shaking. Sloane's attorney had less to say now. The IP address had a tenant, the tenant had an employee, the employee had a scar. The story was selecting its details with cruel efficiency. The judge extended my appointment for a year. She lifted the requirement for prior approval on expenditures up to $5,000 with receipt and justification, citing the conservator's demonstrated prudence. She ordered a restitution plan contingent on criminal findings. She asked Marin to stay on as monitor for 3 months.
Then she did something I did not expect. She looked at my sister directly. Miss Sloane Hart, she said, The law is not a hall where we display shame as art. It is a corridor where we move people and money towards safety. Your mistakes are not crimes. If they were, we'd have to build larger courthouses. If you wish to repair what was broken in this family, it will not happen on my docket. But you might consider beginning with an apology that asks nothing in return. Sloane cleared her throat. Her eyes flicked to me and then back to the judge as if she needed permission to be a person. "I'm sorry," she said, and her voice was raw enough that the words didn't feel staged. "For the way I held the keys like they proved something. For the way I thought lists were love. For the way I made you," she looked at me, "feel like a witness to your own family instead of a member." I nodded. Forgiveness is not a light switch. It's sanding, slow and sometimes boring, but you keep doing it because splinters are not a way to live. After the hearing, the detective met us on the steps. She said, "Lila has made a statement. She says she did it for the firm, not for herself. She says she planned to pay it back. She says she used your name because your credit is clean and your routines were predictable." "Did my sister know?" I asked. "She says no, and the evidence we have supports that. The air tasted cleaner than it had all month. Not sweet, clean." That night, I sat with Mom in the living room where so many small Saturdays were stacked. We looked at the picture frame from the workshop. I had printed a photo of Dad's hands holding a mug, my mug, his chair, a book open on his knee. I slid it in. The corners fit. The glass reflected our faces back at us. And for a second, we were all in the same picture, even though we were learning how to live on opposite sides of a forever. We built a new routine from scraped parts. I drove Mom to the grocery store on Tuesdays. I stood with her in the pharmacy when she told the clerk her birthday, the way she had told the clerk her birthday every month for years, as if it were a secret handshake. I set alerts that were alarms only in the technical sense. I put a whiteboard on the fridge with "this week's money" written at the top, and little boxes with numbers that Mom could check off with a green marker. She liked the green marker. It made all the arithmetic feel like gardening. Sloane started coming by on Saturdays with flowers that weren't guilt, but weren't not guilt either. She wiped the counters and brought limes, because Dad had always said limes were cheerleading in fruit form. Sometimes we talked about the case. More often we didn't. We learned how to talk about the weather as if it were an achievement. Mid-May, the detective called again, this time with an update that was less a plot twist than an epilogue. She said, "Restitution is likely. Lila is cooperating. The funds that moved out, most of them are still in accounts we can reach. There will be normal human losses to fees and friction in time, but the numbers are not ruin." I said, "Thank you," and meant it in the way you mean thank you to a person who has not just delivered news, but has, for a season, stood near your life like a guardrail.
This story took us a long time. If you like it, subscribe. Now, back to the story. Summer built itself carefully. Grief behaved the way everyone says it does. It came clean one day and muddy the next. I learned to expect it the way you expect weather that refuses to read the forecast. Mom started a small garden again, pots on the back steps, tomatoes attempting bravery. We ate the first one with salt over the sink and cried because it tasted exactly like a good year. In July, I filed my third monthly accounting with the court. The numbers sat in rows like students, present, accounted for, not acting up. Marin sent a note back that said only, "Good work." It meant more than any performance review I had ever gotten at the hospital. It meant the lights had stayed on, and the house had remained a house. Sloane and I volunteered at the community center one Saturday, painting a multi-purpose room that had not received multi-purpose love in a decade. We discovered we are still bad at cutting in along the edges, and laughed in a way we hadn't on purpose in months. After, we sat on the curb eating popsicles like the adults we thought we'd be when we were kids. I don't know how to be anyone other than the person who solves things, she said, looking out at a line of clouds that seemed embarrassed to be dramatic. I said, "You don't have to be someone else. You just have to remember we are not problems." She nodded. "I can try." Trying is not nothing. It moves the meter. It can cut the power of a lie by half. In September, the judge set a status conference. Marin reported that the monitoring could end. She said my accountings were unremarkable in the best sense. The judge smiled and said she likes unremarkable more than most people know. She kept the $5,000 limit in place, and I didn't mind. Guardrails had grown on me. They make the road contours visible. The restitution trickled back. Not all of it. Enough. The Merrimack account was drained back into a holding account pending final orders. The home improvement store reversed the purchase when the receipts showed a list of items that read like a thief's attempt at being useful. Grab bars, a shower bench, a ramp. I felt a complicated mercy about that and left it alone. Lila took a plea. She stood in a courtroom in Providence and said the words people have to say when the state asks them to put a shape to their regret. She didn't look at us. She didn't have to. Marin attended the hearing and didn't speak to the press on the steps. For once, nobody asked her to. On the 1-year mark of Dad's death, we went to his favorite place near the river. We sat on a bench he had once threatened to rebuild because it wobbled. It still wobbled. We didn't mind. Wobbling is honest. "Do you ever wish the judge had chosen someone else?" I asked Mom, because I had learned that it was better to ask the question than to audition answers alone in my head. "No," she said. "I wish my father were here, but I don't wish differently about the rest." Sloan, who had been throwing a stick for Mr. Feldman's dog because Mr. Feldman had stopped throwing it as frequently lately, joined us and sat without asking permission. "I wish I had been better," she said. "So do I," Mom said, without malice. "So do we all. And now we try." We sat with the river. We let it not be a metaphor for a minute. We let it be water doing its job. The house stayed warm that winter. The view-only logins became routine. Mom printed the monthly accounting and put it in a folder with a green dot. She liked the dots. She put one on the kettle, too, which I never understood but never removed. In February, I found the little standing block Dad had made me when I was 12. It fit my hand in a way that made me feel like parts of me had not changed for the worse. I taught Mom to use it on a splintering cutting board. We laughed when she got sawdust on her sweater. It felt like the kind of moment people mean when they say the word healing without making it sound like an advertisement. In March, the judge called us in for what she called a ceremony disguised as a hearing. She reviewed the year. She praised the not lack of drama. She extended the conservatorship for as long as we requested, with a biannual review. She asked if there were any objections. There were none. "Miss Hart," she said finally, eyes on me, "I hope you understand that what you have done is not small. Keeping a life from fraying, it's the work of 1,000 unseen stitches. We see them. I see them." "Thank you," I said, and realized I had been waiting to exhale for 12 months. Outside on the steps, Sloan took my hand, which she does not do and never has. "Thank you," she said. And then again, like Mom had said to Dad in the rehab room, "Thank you." We took Mom for pancakes at the diner where the cook calls everyone sweetheart. She ordered strawberries even though they were out of season, because sometimes you choose hope on purpose, not because it's the smart choice, but because it's the right one. At home that afternoon, I walked into the workshop. The frame with Dad's hands hung on the wall now. Beside it, a new frame held a photo of Mom at the sink in sunlight, steam rising, the green dot on the kettle in the corner of the shot, like a quiet joke. I turned off the light and stood there in the dim for a long breath, feeling the way the house held us and allowed us to hold it back. The story didn't end with an arrest or a gavel or a balance sheet that came back to zero. It ended the way most good stories end in real life, with people doing the next right thing again and again, until it stops feeling like heroics and starts feeling like normal. And there was one more thing, which I will tell you because not telling it would make the rest of this feel too clean. 6 months after Lila's sentencing, a check arrived from an insurance policy no one remembered. A rider Dad had added to the trust years ago. Modest, triggered by losses due to fraud. It didn't make us rich. It made something else. Room. We used it to replace the loose stair on the back porch, to fix the cabinet hinge that had squeaked for a decade, to fund a little account labeled Future Splinters. Sometimes when I am alone in the house and the light is the color of forgiveness, I make tea and sit in Dad's chair and run my thumb along the arm where the varnish has thinned. I think about the judge's pen tapping softly before she spoke the sentence that gave me the word for what I had already been doing without a title. Conservatorship. To conserve. To keep safe. To guard against erosion and carelessness and the kind of mistakes that wear faces you recognize. I don't know if my sister and I will ever be the kind of sisters who share recipes every Sunday. I don't know if forgiveness will finish its sanding in our lifetime. I only know that when the bills come, I pay them. When the lights flicker, I check the fuse before I assume the sky is falling. When Mom asks to see the numbers, I open the laptop and move my chair so our shoulders touch while she reads. Some nights I dream we are small again, and Dad is at the workbench, and the two of us are arguing about the blue bowl. In the dream, he laughs and gives us each a bowl, and we both think we've won. I wake up smiling every time. This is how a home stays a home, not by accident, not by decree, by the quiet, relentless acts of stewardship that look like lists and sound like kindness, by telling the truth until the truth is the only language anyone recognizes. The last thing I will say is simple and not dramatic at all. I was not the first choice. My parents named my sister Power of Attorney because she lived close and because she moves like a solution. But when the crisis came, the judge handed me the conservatorship because I could promise the one thing that mattered most, and then keep that promise every day, that my mother would not sit in the dark between an invoice and a points game ever again. That is enough ending for me. Enough and then some. 2 more great stories are next. Don't miss them. Subscribe and turn on notifications.